Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here. Duke, thanks for coming on, man. How are you?
Hey, guys. Doing great out here. Loving the weather. It's been a little rainy, but it's been fairly cool. I guess you're getting roasted.
Yeah, a little
there,
muggy.
huh?
A little muggy. You know, it's interesting. I know we ended the last Conspiracy Corner show talking about the Antarctica and the base at Antarctica. And this is one of those things where we may end up doing 2 or 3 shows on this because there's so much information. There's so much weird stories that it's like you hear one side of the story over here and you're like, well, that's too far-fetched. And then it's like you hear a portion of the same story over here, portion of the story over here, and it's all the same story. You know, it's fascinating. But the base in Antarctica, I guess for the audience, Brian, would you give them an introduction on Base 211 in Antarctica and just a brief overview of it?
Well, basically what it was is that before the war, they had actually invited Admiral Byrd, who had already been down to Antarctica several times, to come with them and do a little reconnaissance mission with them. And in 1938, they went down there, and they ended up actually, I think it was like 200,000 square miles that they flew over and dropped markers on that basically said, Germany owns this land, and they annexed it. It's part of what we call Queen Maud land now, and they were calling it Neuschwabenland, New Swabia. And
I laughed when I first heard that.
Yeah,
New Swabia.
Yeah, New Swabia. And they had actually the name came from the research ship that they sent down there. It's called the Schwabenland. So that was where they got the name for that from. And right about the time that they started establishing a base there, hostilities started breaking out. So they converted it into a fueling base for the submarines that were operating in the South Atlantic in order to have access to fuel without having to go back to Germany for it all the time. So the wolf packs that were prowling around down there causing trouble were all being refueled in Antarctica. But what a lot of people don't know is at the same time this was going on, it didn't just stop with the refueling base. They're down there with all these really nice submarines, you know, top of the line, some of the best stuff in the world at the time. And they're cruising around down there all the time. Well, they're going to notice other weird things, including like areas where you can actually get underneath the ice. And there's caves in there that are huge enough that you can get into with a sub. And apparently at some point they discovered something like this. And it's been since then, you know, independently confirmed through satellite photography and the Russians boring a hole down into Lake Vostok and whatnot, that there are huge voids underneath that 2 kilometers of ice that's supposedly on top of the whole Antarctic plateau there. And that some of these are as tall as the Eiffel Tower. They're gigantic, huge spaces, and that there's actually open fresh water under there. So the Germans sort of grabbed this whole area, like I said, and in addition to having this refueling base there, they were basically building a redoubt there to the point that in 1943, their then Admiral of the Navy, Admiral Dönitz, who was, you know, specifically in charge of the submarines, said that we're pleased to announce that we have built an impregnable fortress in faraway part of the world, a Shangri-La, an impregnable fortress for our Fuhrer. Well, that was 1943. That's 2 years before the war even ended. He already is saying we've got an impregnable fortress there. Now, the other thing that's kind of odd is that by the end of the war, of course, Operation Paperclip, we briefly mentioned that before. That was the Americans' way of trying to grab as many of the Nazi scientists as we could get our hands on at the end of the war, snatch up any weird technology they're working on, which apparently there was a lot of it, and get it before the Russians got it specifically. And long after the war, when we actually started talking to the Russians and exchanging information, we found out that there was a whole lot of those top-of-the-line Nazi scientists that neither country grabbed. In fact, in between people known to have been missing, not killed during the war, just disappeared. 30,000 people And also at the end of the war, the Germans had a new submarine called the Type 21, which obviously they were using the South Atlantic and refueling Antarctica. And according to their records, they had built 100 of these submarines. These things could go underwater for 2 weeks and not have to come to the surface again, which back then was just ridiculously high tech. Only 5 of these have ever been accounted for. So where did the other 95 subs go? Where did these 30,000 really talented, capable technicians, engineers, scientists, where did they all disappear to?
What I think is interesting is all of these Nazi scientists talk about getting help from other worldly beings. And I'm talking about brilliant men. Von Braun, the guy that started NASA, he talked about it. There was another German scientist, and I'll play the clip here in a moment. I can't think of his name. Yeah, he talked about getting help. And what's interesting is these guys are talking about getting help from out of this world alien technology, help from alien technology. And it's just fascinating. You know, it makes you wonder what drew them to Antarctica. I mean, the worst place on the planet. I think Admiral Byrd said that in some areas it's minus 100 degrees in these areas. You know, and you can't be out there in those conditions. I guess you could, if they had.
No, well, I mean, we've got bases there, but those guys are indoors like 99% of the time. The only time they go outside is if they absolutely have to do something. They're not out there romping in the snow. It's freaking horrible, even during the warm months.
But under the ice, it makes me think. I bet it's not as bad underneath the ice. I bet it's not
40 degrees.
Yeah, I bet it's not. Well, I bet it's not as cold. You know, here and maybe this isn't. Maybe I'm comparing apples and oranges here. Like the ape caves here in Washington State. If it's 20 degrees outside, it's still like 52 degrees in there. If it's 100 degrees outside, it's still 52 degrees in there. The temperature never changes inside this cave, and it makes me wonder if down below the surface, if the temperature doesn't change. But I didn't mean to cut you off. You were going on about Admiral Byrd, and I mean, he was really, if you read some of his diary from when they went in there, it is fascinating. Some of the quotes he says about how where they thought it was just going to be ice, there's actually mountains with trees and open lakes. And
well, this is part of the thing that the Germans found when they were running around down there mapping, dropping markers on the 200,000 square miles that they annexed in 1938 and claimed as New Swabia. A lot of that area was ice-free. There's video of it and stuff. We'll show it to you guys because the Germans not only filmed it, but the U.S. filmed it too. There's areas down there without ice on it. Admiral Byrd talked about it. There's a whole mountain of coal. We could have the coal. We could supply the entire world with coal for a while. That was in the teaser, you know.
That's crazy to think about that. There's that much.
Yeah, he also said that there's good evidence that there's mineral resources like uranium and whatnot down there. And then you go back to, since 1961, there hasn't been any nuclear anything allowed there. By international treaty, it's been banned. And nobody's building anything there or mining anything there. Really, even though we're the lone superpower, we don't have any claim to Antarctica more than anybody else does. So there's a lot of these countries that have bases down there, but they're small operations in, like one little place. And there's actually some areas that are off limits. You're not supposed to fly over the South Pole. That's a no-fly zone. There's another zone down there that's about like 10 miles across that's a no-fly zone. And it's strictly enforced, even for rescue planes and stuff. You are not allowed to fly across this. If you want to fly from, let's say, South America to New Zealand, if you look on a globe, the shortest distance is to fly directly across the South Pole. But you can't do that. They route the plane all the way around the southern part of the entire globe to get it over to New Zealand rather than flying across the South Pole.
Well, and the thing with what you just said, take all the crazy alien stories out, take all of the conspiracy theory out of this for a moment. Don't you think it's a little strange? There's like unlimited resources there, unlimited coal. There's uranium. There's another article I read where there's more than enough gold, silver, all kind, and yet no one's really there.
No one's there exploiting it.
Exactly.
If we found like a huge island that had all these things on it, how long would it be before some country claimed it and was just raping the hell out of it?
Oh, yeah.
Pardon my language,
there'd be a war over it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting,
and we've got an entire continent that's like nobody's laid claim to it. I mean, it almost makes you feel like the only reason that this could happen is if there was actually somebody really powerful that had control of this area that wasn't going to let us exploit it.
Right. Which kind of goes into some of the
Base 211.
Base 211, yeah. And it, like I said, for the audience out there, they may look at this, at some of the stuff we go into tonight, may look at it as crazy talk. Go back and read Admiral Byrd's diaries from exploring. I can't even believe they lent it out on the web. He talks about certain things going on, everything from flying machines to, I mean, he's got some crazy stuff in his diaries about going up there. And you think they would have classified that. That's the other thing I don't understand is why they didn't shut this guy up about what was going on up there.
Well, two things happened. First of all, on the way back from all this happening, and remember, this was the era of low tech when you couldn't get on your cell phone and call the USA. You had to wait until they actually got back. They did a press conference in South America, and he said a whole bunch of things that he shouldn't have said. And it was in the papers, and oops, too late to take it back again. When he got to the U.S., he got dressed down for it, and they told him, hey, knock it off. Don't talk about this stuff anymore. Oh, well, I'm just an Arctic explorer. I didn't know any better, So that was what he tried. I think, personally, he was trying to leak some of this stuff. I mean, in a roundabout way, without getting himself in trouble, he was trying to let people know. When he made statements like, the next time we fight a war, it may be against a foe that can fly from pole to pole. He's not describing any country that we knew of on Earth in 1946.
Admiral, you speak of the resources of Antarctica. What are they? What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
Well,
it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there.
Is it any secret? Is there uranium there? That would be the only thing that would be practical to actually go after, I suppose. Everything else would be economically unfeasible, wouldn't it?
Well, as we recklessly expend our resources, the time will come when we'll have to go after that stuff down there. Well, I avoided what you said about uranium. I'm not sure about that. I don't want to have the world fighting over the Antarctic.
Admiral Byrd, is there a competition among other nations to try to get information about Antarctica and possibly to secure some of these resources?
Well, yes. There are now 7 nations very much interested. Russia is interested tremendously. That I'm sure of. Australia has an expedition down there. The Argentine, the Chile, New Zealand, Britain, and so on. Now, you can understand those people down there being interested because they live down there, the New Zealanders, the Argentinians, the Chileans, and Australians. And so we don't do much about claiming anything.
Admiral, you make this sound a little crowded. Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
And this is an admiral of the Navy saying it. And he wasn't the only guy down there. I mean, they had Admiral Nimitz, who was a hero of some of the battles against the Japanese there, who was really the commander of the fleet. They had Byrd there because he was the expert on Arctic conditions. But they had, I've actually got the information right here. So give me a second. Highjump was planned to have lasted for 8 months. The forces were divided into 3 groups and went to different areas. And basically what they were doing was mapping, supposedly. And they were also supposedly testing out the cold weather capabilities of the fleet. The expedition, however, only spent 4 weeks there. It started at the end of February in their mapping, and planes flying a total of 22,700 miles and taking 70,000 photographs. Now, on February 19th, 1946, Byrd's plane went missing, and judging by his log entries, it flew into the hollow earth.
He flies out and he headed north. He gives updates as to his flight, to turbulence that he gets in the air. He drops his altitude, raises his altitude, standard procedures of any pilot. And he does this, and he talks about how he does it, and continues to fly. He has constant radio checks with his base, so they'll know where he is. They can keep up with him. And back in those days, they didn't have GPS and all of that stuff, so they flew by what's called dead reckoning a lot of times. And pilots know exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about dead reckoning. He continues to talk to them until he gets down, until he sees a creature down below, which looks to him like a mammoth, and he drops his altitude to about 1,400 feet, and it is a mammoth. And this begins to really get his attention. He sees a mountain range, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, so now he's been in the air for 4 hours, he says he crosses over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below, no green valley in the Arctic, no green valley. And something is definitely wrong and abnormal here, he says. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side, port is left, starboard is right. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning, and the reason they're spinning is because he's approaching magnetic north. And the magnetic pole, if you ever get around the magnetic pole, you forget your magnetic compass. It's not going to work because the magnetism is so intense. And the movement is so great that it's no use to you. But in any event, he says his navigational instruments are spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. Then he sees this beneath, and he says, at 1,400 feet, and I execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or some type of tight-knit grass. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and we spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below. It appears to be an elephant. No, it looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible, he says, yet there it is. He decreases his altitude to 1,000 feet and he takes binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed it is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp. At 10:30 hours, he encountered more rolling green hills. The external temperature indicator reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Continuing on our heading now, navigation instruments seem normal now. I'm puzzled over their actions. Attempt to contact base camp, radio is not functioning. And now what follows is one of the most incredible things I've ever read in my life. And let me put it in the context of this. When Satan showed the Lord Jesus Christ the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, he did just that. He has power. And there are things going on that there is absolutely no physical definition or logical reasoning to, but the existence of it cannot be denied. And this is what's happening here. In 11:30 hours, countryside below is more level and normal. If I may use that word, ahead we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. Aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. My God, he says, off our port and starboard wings, a strange type of aircraft. They're closing rapidly alongside. They're disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They are close enough now to see the markings on them. It is a type of swastika. This is fantastic. Where are we? What has happened? I tug at the controls again. They will not respond. We're caught in an invisible vice grip of some type. 11:35 hours, our radio crackles and a voice comes through in what appears to, in English, with what appears to be a slight Nordic or Germanic accent. The message is, welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral. You are in good hands. I note the engines of our plane have stopped running. The aircraft is under some strange control and is now turning itself. The controls are useless. In plainer words, he's been taken over completely. Now, up to this point, you're going to say to yourself, well, this is a madman. Or you may say to yourself, I know the power of the devil. I know how he can deceive. And what follows, he is taken into a city by blonde-haired men who look like these Aryans that Hitler and the rest of them were talking about in Germany. And then he's finally taken to their leader. And when he's taken to their leader, he has a conversation with him. He's their master. And that master tells him that essentially that they've been observing us on top of the earth where we live for a long time, and that we have gotten to the point by killing each other, and they're talking about the atomic bomb that had just been recently dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know those two. This happened in 1947, I think this happened. And they were saying that we are going to have to do something with the people who dwell on earth. They tell Admiral Byrd that he's an honorable man, and he asks him, why am I here? They said, because you're chosen to be here. You're a man that we can trust. We're going to tell you what's happening. We're going to tell you all of this. They tell him, they send him back. So he goes back and he tells his superiors. And apparently they tell him to hush this up. This stays hushed until right before he dies, this diary comes out. Because he says, I cannot leave this world without letting humanity know what has happened. I cannot leave. I must tell them what happened.
There were forests. There was open water. He saw some large furry animals walking around down below that to him looked like they were mammoths or mastodons. And then supposedly some sort of a flying disc pulled up alongside of them, put some what we would describe nowadays as a tractor beam on them, and brought them safely to a landing. And then they were ushered in to meet with the head of the race that supposedly dwell in the inner earth, the Ariani. And the Ariani had a meeting with him and said, hey, we allowed you to come in because we know about you. You're a noble person. You're honorable. So we want to talk to you. You need to take this message back to your country and all the other countries. We don't like the way that they're doing things with atomic weapons. They shouldn't be messing with anything atomic. And they should actually get rid of all their atomic weapons, and we'll let them know about our presence, and we'll share our technology with them. And this is interesting because it ties in with a meeting that Eisenhower supposedly had with aliens that were Nordics that told him that if he got rid of his nuclear arsenal, they would share their technology. And he said no. So there's this other weird tie now here. The Ariani look just like tall Nordics, blonde people with the long straight noses and everything. They're supposed to be 15 feet tall. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like somebody maybe we were talking about last episode?
Yeah, the giants.
Now, one of the reasons that the Nazis were so interested in Antarctica is because, and we're going to have to backpedal here. It's going to be a while before we get back to where we're at now in order to understand what's going on and have a clear picture of it. We have to go all the way back to the 1800s when there were two people that turned out books that were heavily, heavily influential on the leaders of the Third Reich. One of which was M.A. Blavatsky, or old Ma Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society. And her idea was that instead of saying that there was a conflict between religion and science, that you should combine them. So that's what she tried to do. And she was pretty brilliant at it, actually. And she turned out a book called The Secret Doctrine. However, this book was also anti-Semitic and talked about the superiority of ancient Aryans. Now, Hitler and the Nazi Party grabbed onto this idea and went, oh, well, the ancient Aryans are just the predecessors of the modern Germans. The modern Germans were giants with supernatural powers at one time, but we lost all of our supernatural powers by inbreeding with human women. So therefore, if we breed these ones that still have this blood together enough times, we'll come back to a pure Nordic Aryan race again. That's the Superman that Hitler was talking about. He was trying to recreate the giants, the original Aryans. And another thing is, their concept was that these Aryans had originally come from a little island continent called Atlantis, and a great deluge had sunk it. Sound familiar? What was that great deluge for the last time we were talking about this? So anyway, this mega powerful, scientifically extremely advanced civilization on this island continent, while we're all being knuckle-dragging cavemen, they get wiped out in this great flood Almost all of them are dead. There's a few of them that made it to the Himalayas, and they took refuge in caves inside the Himalayas. So what's the next thing the Germans do? Well, they send an expedition to the Himalayas, because unlike most of the Western powers, their idea was take whatever works and use it. And the leaders of the Nazi Party a lot of them were members of the Thule group, which was one of the two secret societies that were really tied into the Nazi Party, the Vril and the Thule. Goering, Bormann, Hess, Himmler, and Hitler were all possible members of the Vril as well. And they all had this same sort of strange idea about resurrecting old Germanic superstitions and things that look like they are paranormal, in that it might have been magic, but they might have been describing something that we could describe with science too, if we could figure out what it was they were talking about. So the SS, of course, and especially the SS Ahnenerbe, which is the bureau which did research for the historical roots of the Aryan race, funded 3 expeditions, and it was with let's go back here for a second. The Vril Society. Vril Society was founded in 1918 in Bavaria. And actually it was founded after a meeting in Berchtesgaden, which some people may recognize that name. That's where German had his retreat, his mountain retreat in Bavaria. When Hitler wanted to go take a vacation, that's where he'd go to. Well, that was years later. This is years before, and there it is in the same weird place, Berchtesgaden. And Dietrich Eckert and Rudolf von Subattendorf were 2 of the male members that originally founded this group. There are also some female members that we'll talk about in a little bit. But von Subattendorf had enough good connections and whatnot that he managed to pull the funding to do 3 expeditions to the Himalayas, all specifically to Tibet. And part of what they were doing was phrenology, where they were measuring the distances between noses and chins and the top of the head and all this other weird thing, trying to do studies on certain races, faces are built certain ways and what. It was the whole racist, evolutionist, eugenic thing that the Nazi Party was into. But in addition, they also had these guys that were Ahnenerbe that were running around trying to get information on any old ancient technology or anything. Now, according to the legends, supposedly they did find help from the Tibetan monks there, and they did actually get to meet with some of the old ones that were still living in the caves up there in the Himalayas, and get some information from them. And this is interesting because one of the things that they may have gotten their hands on, which would have been available around there, is something that's actually available in India. It's a really, really old book called the Vimana Shastra, and it describes how in mythological times they had made these flying death machines who were propelled and could float on air by virtue of mercury engines, which somehow made it fly. And this will tie into a bunch of other things that we're going to talk about shortly here. But it had actual diagrams of what these things look like, and they look like flying saucers. And you're going, well, wait a minute. Where the hell did they come up with this? This is something they've had for like thousands of years, passing this book down, making copies of it, and none of it makes sense because they're talking about weapons that can wipe out a city with one shot. And, back then you look at something like that and you go, this has got to be gods, because we don't have any weapons that can do that.
Not to cut you off, but there is an area in India, I believe.
It's radioactive.
It's still radioactive. And they said if you read that Hindu text, it talks about them having this great battle in the sky. And everyone always is like, whatever. Well, they found the city where in the text it talks about this battle happened. And when they went there, it's still just as radioactive as if a nuke was dropped yesterday. The ground is radioactive. Mm-hmm. I think portions of the sand have turned to glass. And it looks like Hiroshima, it looks like places in Japan we drop bombs on.
India. Over 1.1 billion people crowd its modern cities and rural townships, speaking hundreds of languages and practicing a number of different religions. India is considered one of the oldest civilizations, with settlements dating back over 11,000 years. It is also home to several of the oldest records of ancient technologies. ancient Sanskrit texts dating back as far as 6000 BC describe in varying but vivid detail flying machines called vimanas.
Vimanas are aeroplanes, and they are powered by some jet engines. This seems to be true because all the description of the flight behavior, elephants ran away in panic. Grass was thrown out because there was a lot of pressure from behind those vimanas. So that we can say this is a description of the spaceship.
Although mainstream historians believe the Vimana texts are myths, many of the documents contain passages that seem to describe modern machinery and technology.
The Vimanika Shastra goes into metals that are used in these craft. It talks about electricity and power sources. It talks about the pilots and the clothing they have to wear. It talks about the food that they eat. It talks even about the weapons that are kept on these airships.
The flight manuals of the Vimanas are quite similar to the flight manuals you find in the modern passenger flight business, or when you go to the military jet engines. Of course, they have also flight manuals because it's necessary for a pilot to get knowledge about his plane he wanted to fly with.
We also learned that these vimanas could be controlled mentally. And this is a technology that modern militaries are beginning to develop.
Even today, with as advanced as we think we are, almost every manifestation of an actual extraterrestrial civilization today would look almost like magic to us, where it has to do with technological electromagnetic systems that interface with coherent thought and organized thought. And this gets into people go, wow, now you're losing me here. But I tell people, I said, yeah, well, you got to push your boundaries a little bit if you're talking about a true interstellar civilization.
The Vimanika Shastra, or science of aeronautics, indicates Vimanas used a propulsion system based on a combination of gyroscopes, electricity, and mercury. Is this possible?
Mercury is an unusual element. Mercury is metal. It's also a liquid, and is a conductor of electricity. Now, there's unusual things you can do with mercury. You can put it into a closed gyroscopic device with mercury spinning around, and then you can electrify it. And studies have been done on this by NASA and by other scientists. And they find that you have levitation effects, anti-gravity kind of effects, and a spinning bright light is part of it too.
The Vimanika Shastra suggests Vimanas were powered by several gyroscopes placed inside a sealed liquid mercury vortex.
Here's an example of a little kid's gyroscope. You spin it with a heavy wheel around a central axis. Well, a gyroscope seems to do a lot of strange things, even defy gravity. And it does this because it uses what's called rotational or angular momentum. And it wants to keep a particular orientation on its spin axis, the center rod. If you push on that rod, it will want to righten itself up to its original orientation. It wants to keep that same angular momentum. Gyroscopes are used all over the place, in airplanes, in spacecraft, in submarines. This allows them to determine their position based on where they started. They can also use it for finding their velocity or even just the orientation of the vehicle in space. One of the texts talks about Mercury rotating and driving some sort of a powerful wind or a windmill effect. That might be some sort of what we call a flywheel energy storage, where you have a spinning disk and then you extract energy from it slowly. That would be the mercury. And then that could be used to drive some sort of a propeller or what we call a ducted fan sort of system, like you have in a hovercraft. Mercury would be quite good for that because it's a high density, so you'd have a small package for your power plant, and that's always good when you're building an aircraft.
Flywheel energy storage systems, however, tend to lose power quickly. To navigate across space, its size would have to be enormous.
They're fine for use by power companies for load leveling. You put energy in when you don't need it, you get energy out when you need it. But they're sitting on the ground. To have something light enough to actually fly, it's not at all clear that this would be a practical device. Now, maybe the people were trying to describe something that kind of looked like this to them. It might not have actually been mercury, it might have been some other liquid metal.
The Mercury vortex engine is perhaps a failure in the translation because the vortex is not a material quite suitable to a jet engine.
The issue of how are these civilizations traveling faster than the speed of light is a fundamental question. It's a scientific application of things that have been studied for thousands of years, and they're within the Vedas, the ancient Vedic teachings or other ancient teachings, and it is there.
But if Vimanas existed, could this prove there was a worldwide transportation network thousands of years before Columbus?
In the Bhagavad Purana, which is an ancient Sanskrit history, there is a description of a spacecraft that was piloted by a king named Shalva. It's described that it was made of metal. It was described that it sometimes appeared to be in two places at once. It was described as having a motion similar to that of a butterfly. And these descriptions are consistent with what people who observe UFOs today report.
In other Sanskrit texts, such as the Mahabharata, the Rig Veda, and the Ramayana, there can be found descriptions of Vimana measuring as wide as 100 feet, and often equipped with the capabilities of modern aircraft. One Vimana produced a shaft of light, which when focused on a target, consumed it with its power.
It's like a Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon movie from the 30s. They read like the wildest science fiction. People are flying around in airships called Vimanas, blasting each other and having aerial fights, destroying entire cities.
And the crazy thing is that all of those stories are totally accepted in the modern society of India.
I don't think we can say that these descriptions are simply imagination, because even though they were written thousands of years ago, they match what many people today report in terms of observing the actions of UFOs.
Were they just mythological tales that they're making up, fantasy? Or these physical, real events, and they're trying to describe them as the best that they could? That seems to make more sense to me.
I gotta tell you this, I would be out of a job in India. Because there, if I were to talk about ancient aliens and ancient gods, they would say, okay, so what else is new?
Yeah, they're talking about flying saucers, nuclear weapons, ray guns. I mean, one of the descriptions of one of the mighty weapons that they use in Astra, A-S-T-R-A, when they unleashed this weapon, it destroyed a whole city, wiped out part of an army, set the elephants on fire. The elephants were trumpeting, running around on fire. I mean, you get a description like that and you go, how did they think of this? What made them come up with this weird stuff? Because even like 100 years ago, we'd look at something like this and go, this is so far-fetched, give me a break. And now you look at it and you go, we have the technology to do this. What was it that they were describing? Well, to go back to the crazy Germans again, in pre-World War II.
Crazy Germans.
Us crazy Germans. I'm mostly German by blood, too, so I'll take part of the blame.
The show's over.
We're in trouble. I can say that because I'm one of them. You can always tell a German, you can't tell them much, though.
Yeah.
There's another important book that ties into all this. It was written by, I believe it was a British guy back in the late 1800s called Edgar Bulwer Lytton. And the book was called The Coming Race. And it's a science fiction book. He talks about this guy that falls into this crack in the ground, gets lost underground, and comes out into this huge subterranean world where there's these people called the Vrilya that have this sort of complete control over the natural forces of the universe. Which is where the Vril Society got their name from. It was actually the All-German Society for Metaphysics, but they called themselves the Vril Society for short. And the inner circle of this Vril Society were mostly Nazis. So they sort of absorbed this whole idea that there is such a thing as Vril, because back then people believed in ether. This was before Einstein's theory of relativity was widely accepted by everyone. There were still competing ideas running around. And being that Einstein was Jewish, they were not about to accept his idea.
Right.
They just went, that's garbage physics. We'll stick with quantum physics. And that's what they were working on. But they had other ideas. And it's interesting that one of the things that they thought might be real is the ether. And Nikola Tesla also said, yes, the ether is real. And that's how a lot of my stuff works. So they had like a really different way of looking at physics. Now, their idea of Vril, what is the Vril power? The Vril is the same thing as if you've ever heard of prana, chi, orgone, ki, or Star Wars, the Force, electromagnetism, gravity. All these are all combined in the power of Vril. And what Vril is really is zero-point energy. What they're talking about is harvesting the energy from the quantum fluctuations that occur everywhere constantly. It's limitless, endless source of energy. And they were trying to figure out how to actually generate this, what kind of a machine could do this. Well, now at this point, these guys are all starting to organize this political movement. They're putting this government together. But in the back of their minds, they've still got this whole thing running like, we got to find out more about our ancestry. We got to get more information on this. They're digging up more information as they get more highly placed. They have better and better resources to dig it up with, and they got people to work for them. So it gets faster and faster and faster. And what they start thinking is that the legend of Atlantis really is real. There really was these super-powered people there that had these amazing abilities and incredible science, and that part of Antarctica, at least, was part of the Atlantean Empire before it somehow got covered with ice. So they wanted to send an expedition down there to do some more research since they had found this Vimana Shastra over in India. And then, okay, there's some information there that this might be real. We'll send an Antarctica expedition. Now, apparently they actually asked Admiral Byrd if he wanted to come with them, and he begged off at that point. But they went down there, and this was in 1938 when they were throwing down the markers and taking over the land and everything. And now, according to the stories after that, they not only established a base there, but they found old ruins underneath the ice. There were ice caves that you could actually get underneath the whole giant ice sheet. And there was some of these stuff where there was ancient ruins and chambers that were still open. And they dug their way into them. And not only that, but they started building their own undergrounds down there, which is sort of ironic if you think about it, because they were all trying to find this real energy, and they were all enthralled with the Vrilya subterranean race. And by the end of World War II, they were putting all of their factories and everything underground and becoming a subterranean race that they were so enthralled with because they were getting the crap bombed out of them by the Allies all the time. They couldn't have anything on the surface. They had to make underground facilities to build everything in anyway. So there's another reason to think that they could have done something like this, because they were already doing this all over Europe and in Germany, making these giant underground facilities to build everything in. And there's rumors of, again, the rumors can't verify, that they had moved some of this giant boring equipment down to Antarctica in the late 1930s. So they had like 5-6 years of being able to dig and hollow out these places before 1943 rolls around, and Admiral Dönitz goes, well, I built an impregnable fortress for my Fuhrer, a virtual Shangri-La at the far ends of the world. Well, yeah, they've been down there digging and building. And at that point, even with a nuke, how are you going to get through two kilometers of ice?
Yeah, the part that I don't... One thing you said earlier that really kind of hit me was talking about these aliens down below this underground facility and how they said to give up your nukes. And if you ever go watch a lot of these different alien shows, or if you ever listen to a witness talk that's been abducted, they all kind of have the same story. That one in England, what was it? In the forest. I can't think of the name.
Rendlesham.
Yeah, the UFO flew over the base, and they claimed that some sort of light came out of it, hit the area where they had the nukes, and shut everything down, and then took off. And it makes you wonder why do they care about the nukes? Makes you wonder what is the issue with the nukes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing is that's happened a ton of times in the U.S. too, where they've had UFOs hovering around military bases, and all of a sudden all of the nukes will go off, and then they'll all come back on again, and they've got no control over it when they're off. They can't. They've tried manually switching back on again. No, it doesn't work until whoever it is that's in the shiny disc out there decides apparently to turn them back on again. So. And again, that makes sense. If you got some secret base in Antarctica and you don't feel like being nuked, it'd be kind of handy to be able to just shut them off, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's interesting too that they that it's a nuke-free zone. It's a no-fly zone. It's a no. What's going on there that it's a no-fly zone? Can I tell you a funny story?
Go ahead, man. Let's hear the story.
So, I saw this on Facebook, and I actually looked it up, and it's true. Back during the Cold War, the Russians were looking at the Pentagon, and there was this particular little tiny building that they saw people going in and out of, and they assumed that it was an underground base. They assumed it was something important because 2 to 3 times a day, crowds would go into this building, and they'd be in there for like an hour, and then sometimes they'd come out, and so they pointed 2 nukes at this building. They had 2 nukes ready to go at this building at any time. They figured it was something really important, and they had watched it from satellites. They had watched people going in and out of this building, and they could not figure out. They honestly thought this was some sort of underground base. It was a hot dog stand. They were going in and out of it during lunchtime, right around noon, and also too, I think at the second break you get at work. But they were going in. It's a hot dog stand at the Pentagon, and it's in the middle of this courtyard, and it's this little circular round building. It's actually a hot dog stand.
World's most beautiful hot dog stand.
Two nukes pointed at this thing for years, and it's a freaking hot dog stand, you know.
Yeah, that's some good humor there. I wonder how much of that shit we did. We probably got nukes pointed at stuff over there that's like, there's nothing there
it's
anymore.
It's a Pizza Hut.
No, yeah, it's the Russian Pizza Hut.
Yeah.